In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the AC condenser bracket on this Ford F-150. Just as a disclaimer, we're going to have to disconnect the AC condenser and remove it, so you're going to have to get your refrigerant properly and professionally drained, evacuate that from the system. You don't want to open any lines with the system under pressure. Let's get started. Typically, what you'd want to start with is removing the plastic cover that covers all of this. Well, in our case, it's missing, but it should have 6 push clips. One here, 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 and here, 3 on each side, and then you would pull the whole thing right off. Continuing from that, there are 4 10mm screws. They screw into the upper radiator support and hold the fuse box in place. Once again, 10mm, remove all 4 so we can push this fuse box back and off of this support. Pull this up and push it back. You can use a bungee cord if you want to tie it out of the way. On each side where the headlight is, you'll see a rubber shield. Let's disconnect that. There's a push clip here that has a screwdriver cutout on it, a Phillips head screwdriver. Sometimes you're able to unscrew it, and I say sometimes because over time these break and then you have to just pry them out. The threads on it become not usable anymore. So in our case, it looks like it works. I'm going to leave this into the shield like this, pull the shield down, and then there's this one over here on the radiator support. Use a trim tool to get this one out. These are the ones that we actually have to remove, but like I said, I just want to pull the whole shield off. There's one more at the bottom here, and you can use a trim tool to get to all these. And there we go, pull the shield away, and we'll do the same to the other side. Here in this area, we have to remove a few things such as the horns, the hood latch cable, and this temperature sensor. Let's start with the hood latch. It's got 2 little clips, or tabs, I guess, that lock it in. If you just press those, you should be able to slide the cable through, up and over, and unhook it. Pop it off of this radiator support. While I'm here with the trim tool, I'm just going to pop this off and set it aside. I'm not going to disconnect the hood latch cable off of this. I'm just going to take off this whole retainer off of the AC condenser bracket, and I might as well unplug the horn assembly now. We can set this aside, and with a 10mm socket, remove the horn assembly. Tilt it up and out. Now let's disconnect the transmission cooler. It's got 1 hose on each side, and then a couple plastic clips. It doesn't matter where you start, just make sure you have a collection bucket underneath because some fluid will come out. This cooler is technically full of fluid. Obviously, as long as you have fluid in the system here, which there should be. But take the clamp down with some pliers, pull this clip off on the other side, slide it up and out of the way, break this hose free, slide it out on this side. Okay, and now we can disconnect the lines. All right, collection bucket is ready. This vehicle's been sitting for a long time, so looks like the fluid has drained, but this hose is disconnected. We'll leave it to the side. And now we just have to do the same over here. And there it is. Pull this aside. For me, this line already popped off of here from its retainer. This one did not, so I'm going to do just that. I'm going to stick a trim tool behind it, try to pry it away. I just want to disconnect it from this AC condenser bracket. There we go, and lower it down a little bit. I'm not going to go very far down because of this shield, which we actually also have to disconnect. From underneath, you'll see 4 push clips holding this thick rubber shield in. This is where those 2 lines go through that we just popped off. And we'll have to remove these retainers because they go into the bottom of that AC condenser bracket, which we have to move out of there. So get a trim tool, and it doesn't matter where you start, but all 4 have to come off. Okay, I'm just gonna cut these off and install new ones. We have 1 left to go right over here. Okay, now we can pull this down just like this. There's an 8mm bolt down there that holds the fan shroud onto the radiator, and then a 13mm bolt at the top holding the radiator onto the radiator support. On the other side, you have the same exact thing. That one's tucked in there, the 13mm, and then the 8mm is all the way down there where you can barely see it. We have to remove all 4 of those bolts that I just mentioned to free up the radiator and the shroud so it can slide down just a little bit. There's one. This was the best view that I could give you. And here's the other side. There it is. And for the big 13mm bolt at the top, just push this line out of the way. Okay, there it is. And other side. There it is. Through the upper radiator support, you can see the lower power steering cooler hose. That's the return hose. It goes from the reservoir right to the cooler. If you don't have a hose clamp tool, the special tool, you might have to remove that upper radiator hose or other things out of the way to get to this clamp, unfortunately. I have the tool, so I'm going to use it. What this does is it just squeezes the clamp like that and locks in the open position. I'm going to leave it like this, and with the clamp loose, we should be able to pry that hose off of there. Grab it from underneath and pull on it gently. Use a pry bar or screwdriver to help it along. Don't damage anything though. You can't even reach it from the top. Okay, slide that clamp out of there to make room for the hose. There we go. Fluid will come out, so make sure you have a collection bucket underneath to catch the fluid. Plug the end of the hose that you just took off so that you can limit the amount of fluid that is drained. You can use an old spark plug if you have one. I know this one's not actually used, but it's not going to be used. This is basically what I keep it for, is to plug the end of hoses. Now let's disconnect the other line. Try to spin this clamp around so you can get to it a little bit better. Open it up. This hose is somewhat swollen, so unfortunately I can only go this way with it, not the other way, but that's okay. At least it's off of there. That's the goal here. And now you can take anything that you have to pry, and I'm just going to use this trim tool. Slowly pry this hose off. I don't have much space here to grab onto it. Stick the pry bar through that same opening in the upper radiator support, and just push the hose back. That should slide it off all the way. More fluid will come out, keep that in mind. There we go. Hose was not damaged. Just gonna leave this like that. Make sure you don't lose that clamp. This same power steering line here is clipped onto the AC condenser bracket at the top. We'll have to unclip it or remove the retainer so that we can pull this bracket out of here. There we go. Get that out of there. On the passenger side of the AC condenser, it's now time to disconnect the 2 lines. At the top, you'll see this one with a 10mm headed bolt on it. Break this free, remove the bolt, and we'll pull the line off. Just as a little disclaimer, if the place that you had your refrigerant evacuated at pulled a vacuum on the system, as soon as you pop off this first line, you'll hear a hissing noise. Don't be alarmed though, that hissing noise is not pressure, it's the vacuum equalizing with atmospheric pressure. Okay, this wasn't very bad. Sometimes I've heard it where it has a lot more of a vacuum, and sometimes it won't do it at all because either a vacuum wasn't pulled or the system already has a leak, and well, this is why you're in here replacing parts. Down below you'll see a 13mm nut holding on the lower line. Remove this off of the stud. This stud will stay in here unless you want to remove it. There we go. Pull that out. If you wanted to remove the stud, you would use an E7 inverted Torx socket. And now it's finally time to start removing this AC condenser with its bracket from the vehicle. To do this, there are 2 tabs, one on this side, one on the other side. They look the same. It has a hook, a tab, and then a lock. You have to press the lock in so that the tab can slide up and out of this hook. You have to push the AC condenser and radiator back, which is why we unbolted the radiator. Pull this down a little bit so it doesn't lock back in. Let's do the same thing to the other side. Unlock it, unhook it, pull it forward. Now you just have to find the right angle for this to slide out at. Push the radiator back so you can unhook the AC condenser completely here. Okay. There we go, this comes down, and there it is. Now we just have to separate it from the bracket. To unlock this bracket, it has two clips at the top that you have to pry out, just like this. Pull the bracket forward, and there's the bracket. Now take the new AC condenser and let's line it up with the bracket. The bracket should just slide on both sides and clip up and over the top here. That's one and two. Bracket's installed. And now we just have to reverse the process. So slide this whole assembly down. Make sure all of these lines and hoses are out of the way. Make sure you're not pinching anything on this side. We're gonna have to slide it up and hook the AC condenser bracket into the radiator. There isn't a special trick to getting this up here. It's all about finding the angle for it to slide up. Okay, there we go. Finally got it. On this side, it looks like it wants to line up. So I'm gonna lock it in. The top tab right here is also locked in, so that's perfect. And now we'll do the same on this side. Make sure they're both lined up. And there you go. At the top, it's also lined up. At the top, you have these hooks right here. These are lined up with the radiator. Everything is flush just like it was before, so that's perfect. The new condenser will have two plastic caps, one on each end where the lines connect. Let's get those off of there and connect the lines. You want this system open for as little time as possible because the longer it's open, the more moisture makes its way in there, and we're trying to avoid that. So remove these 13mm headed bolts. Take this out, remove this plug. Inspect and replace your O-ring if necessary. Slide the line in, make sure it goes in nice and smooth. And make sure it gets bottomed out completely by hand. You don't want to suck it in with the bolt, that could damage things. Take the bolt, put it in, and let's snug it up. Okay, once it's bottomed out, I'm going to give it about 1/8 of a turn, make sure it's nice and snug, and then we'll move to the lower line. Same over here, remove this bolt that it comes with. This one also is used just to hold on this cap. Here you can either reuse your old stud or install a new one. I happen to have a new one, and the thread pitch for it is M8 by 1.25. Mine has a 5mm cutout on the end of it, so I'm just going to use a ratchet, install it, just bottom it out all the way. You don't need to tighten this a lot because when you put the nut on, it'll actually want to pull both ends of the stud, and it'll basically automatically tighten on both sides. This is bottomed out right here. Give it a little extra and just stop right there. Now we can grab the line, slide it over. Press it on all the way by hand. Grab the mounting nut, thread it on. And same as for the top, bottom it out right here, and then give it about 1/8 of a turn, make it snug, and you're good to go. You want to let the O-ring do the sealing. You don't want to over tighten this, it will strip the threads or break something, and then obviously it won't seal anymore. Back underneath, let's reinstall the push clips that held this in place here, this shield. Try to line up the holes with the holes in the bracket there. Just put back all of the ones that you have. Now let's get this upper hose connected, the power steering hose. I'm using the line to kind of guide it in place. Make sure you slide it on all the way, and we'll need to grab that clamp and squeeze it so I can actually see it all the way. As you can see, it's just waiting over here. Okay, now it's time to grab the clamp, squeeze it, try to get it up and over the hose. My needle nose pliers keep slipping, so I'm just going to use these hose clamp pliers. Hopefully these can get a better grip on it. Okay, there we go. All right, so the clamp is on. We need to get this hose seated a little more. Get the clamp a little further. Okay, so that just released. I would like for the hose to go on a little bit further. So I'm gonna try to hold this clamp and push the hose in. It might not want to, because as you can see right here where it's a little bit swollen, that's where it sat before. So technically it is fully seated. I just would have liked to see it a little further. If this is where it wants to stay, then that's totally fine. The clamp has plenty of space. You just want to make sure it's not sitting right over this beveled part of the fitting where the hose seats. And you want to make sure there's plenty of room here. I have a couple millimeters left before the end of the hose. You don't want it right on the edge because it can pop off over time. I'm just going to give this one more push. There we go. That's good. I like it where it is right there. So let's put the other line in. Now let's get the power steering cooler hose into the AC condenser. There we go. Try to get it to slide over there. Push that hose in all the way. And now we're going to use the hose clamp pliers and grab onto that clamp, slide it on, make sure that hose is locked in nicely. Right about here is where I want it, right in the middle. And there we go, hose is locked on. Now let's get the transmission cooler in. Press this hose all the way onto the fitting. Make sure it's bottomed out all the way like that. While I'm here, I'm going to put the clamp back on. While I'm here, I'm just going to put this clamp back on. Okay, slide it down right about halfway between the end of the fitting and the end of the hose. Let's do the same on this side. Slide the hose in all the way. Okay, that's bottomed out. Let's get the clamp resecured. Okay, and get it right about halfway. Let's hook this side in first. Slide it into its retainer over here, and on this side as well, just like this. That's installed. Let's resecure these lines over here, this one as well. And over here, let's resecure this harness. Moving up, resecure the ambient air temp sensor. Resecure the hood release cable, and let's reconnect it. To do that, all you have to do is just slide it right back in. Let's mount the horns. Make sure that's nice and tight. Plug these in. Resecure this power steering line at the top here. Let's get this resecured. Secure it onto the headlight. And on the AC condenser bracket, this is going to be the tricky part because you have to squeeze your hand back here and press the push clip on. There you go, make sure it's seated all the way. Okay, perfect. Make sure they're all secured properly, and do the same to the other side. Right here, had a 13mm headed bolt. Line that up with the mounting bushing. Try to thread it on by hand as much as you can. And I'm just going to use my ratchet to tighten it. Before I completely bottom this out though, I'm going to pause right here. I'm going to put the other side bolt in so that I know the radiator is lined up on both. This one's a little bit easier to reach, and it lines up perfectly. So that's great. Start it in by hand. This one starts in. Now we can tighten up both. I'll just continue with this one since I'm here now. There we go. That's bottomed out. Another 1/8 of a turn. That's it. You just want this to hold the radiator onto this bushing. Don't crush anything. Same on this side. You don't want to damage the radiator by crushing it completely. All right, that's nice and snug. Let's resecure the fan shroud onto the radiator. Start the 2 8mm bolts. Just like with the radiator, you don't want to tighten this past the point where it's snug because it can actually break the fan shroud, or worst case the radiator where the fitting is, or that J-nut, and you don't want to damage either of those. Those need to be tightly secured onto each other. Okay, so that's snug right there. Give it a little extra, perfect, and we do the same to the other side. Let's resecure this fuse box up on top here, line it up, start in all of the mounting bolts, or I guess screws. They're pretty coarse threaded. Tighten them all up. All right, so with that tight, if you had another cover that went up here, I don't, mine's missing, you would put that on at this point. At this point, you would go back to your local shop and have the AC system professionally recharged. It is important that the proper amount of refrigerant makes its way back in so that you can actually have it functioning properly. If it's too much, it'll overpressurize and it'll shut off, and if it's too little, it won't work very well.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.